If he bites me, let him. I've been through worse. That's what I told the shelter volunteer when she warned me about the puppy in the corner pen, and he hadn't so much as looked at another soul since he arrived 3 weeks ago. Wouldn't eat from a hand, wouldn't bark, wouldn't whimper. Just sat there head down, eyes distant like he'd been through 100 winters alone. I wasn't there looking for a dog. Truth is, I was just looking for a break from the cold. The December wind was slicing through my coat like it had a vendetta. I'd walked past the shelter twice before I gave in. A warm bench and hot coffee sounded like heaven, even if it meant pretending I was interested in adopting. Inside, the woman at the front desk didn't even flinch at my scruffy clothes and old army boots. She smiled like I was just another dad looking for a family pup. She offered me coffee and told me to take a look around. That's when I saw him. He was curled up in the back corner of his pen, facing the wall, a tiny golden shape barely bigger than a rolled-up blanket. He didn't flinch when I knelt beside the bars, didn't move when I called him buddy or tapped the wire gently. The sign on the pen said his name was Max, but it might as well have said, "Do not disturb." You could feel the stillness around him, like he'd built a little world no one else was allowed to touch. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the way his ribs showed just slightly through his fur, or maybe it was the way his tail was tucked so tight you could mistake him for a statue. But something in me shifted. I'd seen that kind of stillness before, in foxholes, in the eyes of kids in foreign villages who'd seen more than they should have. I'd felt it in myself when I came back and didn't know how to speak to anyone who hadn't been where I'd been. The volunteer, a kind-looking woman with silver hair and a green fleece vest, came over when she saw me lingering. "He's not aggressive, just scared. We think he came from a hoarding situation. Didn't even know how to walk on a leash at first," she said softly. "Mind if I sit with him for a bit?" I asked. "You can go in if you want, but he might not react well. He hasn't let anyone touch him." "I've been shot at," I said with a shrug. "I think I can handle a bark." She nodded and unlatched the gate, holding it open as I slipped inside. Max didn't move, didn't even twitch his ears. I sat down slowly, cross-legged, keeping a respectful distance. The cold concrete seeped through my jeans, but I didn't care. It was still better than the sidewalk outside. For a long while, we just sat there. He didn't acknowledge me, and I didn't try to force it. I just let myself breathe, the kind of breathing I hadn't done in a while. Calm, steady, real. No one was shouting. No one was pressing a clipboard in my hand or asking for paperwork. Just a man and a broken little dog sharing silence. I started talking to him eventually, about nothing in particular. Told him about a hot dog stand on 8th Street that used to sell the best chili dogs in the state. About a girl I once danced with in a barn when I was 19. About the time I slept under a bridge in Ohio and got woken up by a raccoon trying to steal my crackers. He didn't move, but I kept talking. The way you talk to yourself when no one else is around, like you're trying to remind your voice it still exists. After about an hour, the volunteer poked her head in and offered me more coffee. I nodded, and when she came back with the styrofoam cup, she paused. "You've been in there a while. Want me to take over?" "No," I said quietly. "I think I'll stay." She nodded again and walked away, a little slower this time. Maybe she understood what I did. This wasn't about a dog getting rescued. It was about two souls trying to figure out if the world had any kindness left in it. The next day, I came back. She seemed surprised to see me, but not in a bad way. "You again," she smiled. "Back for Max?" "Back for the quiet," I said, but she knew what I meant. I sat in the pen again. This time I brought a sandwich, turkey and cheese. I didn't offer it to him directly, just sat half near him and ate mine on the other side of the pen. He didn't touch it that day. On the third day, he sniffed it. On the fourth, he moved it closer. By the end of the first week, he had eaten half of what I brought. He still didn't look at me. That's when I asked about walking him. They told me he hadn't gone more than a few feet on a leash, that he would freeze up and have to be carried back. I said I'd try anyway. The first time I clipped the leash to his collar, he tensed like I'd shocked him. But I didn't pull. I just sat there beside him with the leash loose between us. 10 minutes later, I stood up and stepped toward the door. No pressure, just movement. He stayed put, but his eyes followed. That was the first day I knew for sure he saw me. A week later, he walked 5 steps. Then 10. Then 20. By the third week, he was walking beside me to the end of the block. The volunteers started whispering when I came in. Not in a bad way, but in that surprised, hopeful way people get when they're watching something bloom out of season. They started giving me old blankets and extra dog food. One guy gave me a pair of gloves. I told him thanks and that I had a place. I didn't. But I wasn't ready to let anyone help me yet. Max still hadn't let me touch him. But he was different now. When I walked in, his ears perked. He came to the gate. He sniffed my coat. One day, he licked the back of my hand when I set down his treat. I didn't move. Didn't say a word. Just let the moment pass. Then came the snowstorm. I didn't make it to the shelter for 2 days. Buses were shut down and I spent the nights under the overhang behind the post office. When I finally made it back, I was limping from the cold. Max was at the gate, tail still but eyes alert. The volunteer let me in without a word. I sat, slower than usual. He came to me this time. Sniffed me. Sat right beside me. And for the first time, he leaned his head against my arm. I felt my eyes sting. "I missed you too, Bud," I whispered. He looked up, right into my face, just for a second. And I swear to you, he saw me. Not just the man sitting there, not just the coat or the old boots. He saw the parts of me I didn't show anyone. The parts that hurt when I stood too fast, the ones that clenched every time I heard a car backfire. The part of me that still woke up some nights thinking I was back overseas. He saw it all. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't know what came next. I had no address, no job, no plan. But I had something now. I had a reason to show up, to be still, to be kind. Even if it was just for a little dog with a quiet soul. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start. The first time Max followed me to the door without hesitation, it caught the attention of everyone in the shelter. One of the younger volunteers dropped his clipboard. The front desk woman gasped so loud I thought something was wrong. But it was just Max, walking up beside me like we'd always been a pair. We didn't go far that day, just down the sidewalk, past the mural of dancing dogs someone had painted on the side of the vet clinic. Max paused to sniff it, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. I told him the German Shepherd on the far left reminded me of someone I served with. He looked back at me like he understood. Walking with Max wasn't like walking any other dog I'd ever known. He didn't tug or dart or sniff every tree like it held a secret. He stayed close, right next to me, shoulder nearly brushing my knee, like he thought if we stayed side by side, no harm could come from either direction. Maybe he was right. One of the shelter ladies, Marlene, started slipping me granola bars every morning. "For your walk," she said like it was just a casual gesture. But I knew she knew I was living rough. The bars were always wrapped in a napkin, like that made it more dignified. I always thanked her, tucked them into my coat pocket, and ate them somewhere Max couldn't see. I didn't want him thinking food just showed up for everyone. By the second week of walking, Max had started wagging his tail. Not the full, joyful kind of wag I'd seen from dogs chasing balls in parks, but a soft little sweep, barely there, like he was testing what happiness felt like. I didn't point it out, just smiled and made sure we went a little farther each day. Past the bus stop, around the small grocery store, by the church that rang its bell at noon even when no one was inside. One afternoon, a little boy pointed at Max and shouted, "Puppy!" Max froze. His legs locked, and his head dropped like he expected something bad to follow. I crouched down and whispered to him, told him it was okay, that the kid was just excited. After a moment, Max lifted his head again. The boy's mom smiled and gave me a thumbs up from across the street. I didn't wave back, but I did nod. It felt like the first nod I'd given to a stranger in years. That night, I found a dry alley between two buildings where the wind didn't scream so loud. Max had to go back to the shelter, but he left something with me, a kind of warmth, like there was finally something in the world that waited for me. The old me, the soldier, the son, the husband, might have called it hope. I just called it Max. Then came the fundraiser. The shelter had planned it for months. A holiday adoption event with hot cider and cookies and Santa hats for the dogs. Marlene asked if I'd bring Max out during it. "You don't have to talk or anything," she promised. "Just be around. People like to see success stories." I wanted to say no. I didn't like crowds. Too much noise, too many moving pieces. But when I looked down and saw Max wagging that little tail of his, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. So I came. I stood in the back with Max on a leash, a paper cup of cider in my hand. A few people came up and asked about him. One man offered to adopt him on the spot, said he'd be great for his wife's Instagram page. I didn't say a word, just turned and walked away. Max stuck to my side like glue. Later, the man asked Marlene why that homeless guy was allowed to hang out with the dogs. She told him if he had a problem, he could leave. He did. That night, I sat beside Max in the pen again, and for the first time, I rested my hand on his back. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just kept breathing. So I kept it there. Gentle and still. The next morning, something happened I didn't expect. The shelter director asked to speak to me. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong. Maybe someone had complained again. But she smiled when she saw me, not the tight, polite kind. Really smiled. "We had a donor offer to sponsor a foster placement," she said. "Just temporary. You'd have to check in once a week, let us know how it's going. But we think Max would do better in a quieter place. Somewhere he knows." It took me a second to understand. "You mean, with me?" "If you're willing. We can provide food, a crate, a leash, basic vet coverage." I sat down before my legs gave out. My first thought was, how? I still didn't have a real roof. Just an overhang I shared with a guy named Troy who talked in his sleep. But I couldn't say no. I looked at Max, curled in his corner, and I knew I'd find a way. So I said yes. They gave me a voucher for a motel room. Just 1 week to start. Enough to get Max settled. Enough to let me breathe in warmth again. The room smelled like bleach and old carpets, but it had a heater and a bathroom and a real bed. Max didn't know what to do at first. He sniffed everything twice and hid under the table. I didn't push him. I let him figure it out. By the third night, he was sleeping on the floor beside my mattress. On the fifth night, he jumped onto the bed and curled up beside my feet. I hadn't slept that well in years. Every morning we walked, through parks, down alleys, past bakeries that made Max pause every time they opened their back doors. I started picking up odd jobs. Sweeping, unloading boxes, even helping an elderly man with his porch steps in exchange for a warm sandwich. One guy gave me $20 just for lifting furniture. The world didn't feel so sharp anymore. Max changed too. He started watching squirrels like they were clowns. He barked once when a pigeon flew too close. He licked my face one morning when I overslept. And slowly I stopped thinking of the motel as temporary. I started thinking about what came next. One morning, Marlene came by with a clipboard. "Just an update form," she said, "for the donor." Max ran to her and wagged his tail like she was family. She teared up. "Can I put you down as his foster still?" she asked. I nodded. "Put me down as whatever keeps him with me." She smiled and scribbled something. When she left, I sat on the motel bed and looked at Max. "You think we're ready to find our own place, bud?" He barked. Just once. But that was answer enough. The first time Max barked at someone without fear in his eyes, I nearly dropped my coffee. It was a clear morning, late January, and the frost clung to the motel windows like lace. I'd just finished tying my boots when Max jumped off the bed and padded toward the door, ears perked. A second later, someone knocked. He let out a sharp bark. Not scared, not frantic, just alert. A proper someone's at the door kind of bark. And when I opened it, there stood Marlene with a big grin and a bag of supplies. "Well, I'll be," she said, eyes flicking to Max, who was now sitting like a proud soldier on the carpet. "He's coming into himself." "He barked," I muttered, still a little stunned. "Good," she said, stepping inside. "That's what dogs do." The bag she brought had food, a new leash, a squeaky ball shaped like a slice of pizza, and a rolled-up mat with Max's name stitched into it. I looked at it like it was made of gold. "A donor wanted him to have a proper bed," she explained. "Said every good dog deserves his own name on something." Max sniffed the mat cautiously, then plopped down on it like he'd known it was his all along. Marlene didn't stay long. She always said she didn't like to overstay joy. Before she left, she handed me an envelope. Some of the volunteers pooled together. No pressure, just something to get you both a little more stability. Inside was a prepaid debit card. I didn't know what to say. My fingers tightened around it like it might disappear. I thanked her the only way I knew how, with a quiet nod and a promise I wouldn't waste it. That weekend, I found a room for rent on the edge of town. It was in a house owned by an older man named Carl, who mostly kept to himself and only rented to veterans. Said we understood the quiet. I paid for the first month with the card and promised to cover the rest with work. Carl didn't ask questions. The room had a small window, a heater that clicked like a metronome, and enough space for Max's new mat. To me, it felt like a palace. Max adjusted quickly. He liked the smell of Carl's cooking, the regularity of the mailman's footsteps, and the little backyard full of dried leaves and stubborn squirrels. For the first time in months, I saw him chase something. Not out of fear, but out of curiosity. I picked up more work. Mornings at the hardware store unloading pallets, afternoons sweeping floors at a repair shop. Every time I came home, Max greeted me with his soft bark and tail swish. I kept a jar of peanut butter dog treats by the door, and after a few weeks he started nudging it as soon as I walked in, his eyes expectant. The local library offered free resume help. I walked in one rainy Tuesday and sat with a woman named Ellen, who helped me piece together my past work history. She typed with the kind of speed that made the keyboard sound like rain. At one point, she looked up and said, "You've done a lot, more than most." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. We printed 10 copies. I handed out 7 by the end of the week. Max came with me on the days I had nothing scheduled. He walked proud now, tail held mid-air, posture steady. People stopped to admire him. Kids asked to pet him. He still didn't love strangers, but he tolerated a soft pat or two. One morning at the park, a little girl in a pink hat approached us with her dad. She asked if Max liked belly rubs. "Not really," I said. "But you can say hi." She knelt and held out her hand, palm open. Max sniffed it, then sat down right beside her. She giggled and said he felt like a teddy bear. Her dad looked over at me. "Beautiful dog. You get him from the shelter?" "Yeah, they rescued him from a tough place," he smiled. "Looks like he rescued someone too." I didn't answer, just watched Max sniff the grass and wag his tail. The following week, I got a call from a landscaping company. They needed help clearing winter brush from residential properties. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. I showed up early every day. I stayed late. After 2 weeks, the supervisor said I could bring Max along if he stayed leashed. So Max became the crew mascot. He'd sit in the truck while we worked and bark if anyone came too close. The guys brought him scraps from their lunches. One of them, a wiry guy named Hank, gave Max an old fleece blanket that his dog had outgrown. "He deserves the good stuff," Hank said. Max curled up with it every night. Back at the house, Carl invited me in for coffee sometimes. We didn't talk much. Mostly sat in companionable silence while the old floor heater hummed. He had a beagle named Duke, who liked to sit on the couch like he paid rent. Duke and Max got along fine. They weren't playmates, but they shared space the way old souls do, with respect. One night, Carl poured us both a mug and said, "You think you'll keep him?" "Thinking about it," I said. "Don't think too long. Dogs like that, they choose you once. Might not choose again." I knew he was right. That weekend, I went to the shelter and filled out the paperwork. The staff clapped when I handed it in. Someone brought out a Polaroid camera and took a picture of me and Max sitting on a bench out front. They pinned it to a corkboard under the title, "Forever Homes." I didn't cry. But I held Max a little tighter that night. Now that he was officially mine, I started investing more into our future. I found a crate at a yard sale, bought a second-hand coat with a built-in harness slot for colder walks. Ellen from the library helped me enroll in a local job program for veterans. I had interviews lined up for the first time in years. Max started barking at the vacuum. He hated it. Every time I turned it on, he'd retreat behind the couch, grumbling under his breath like an old man cursing the news. He also developed a habit of stealing one sock out of the laundry basket and hiding it under his mat. Always just one. Always mine. Carl found it hilarious. "You got yourself a real character," he said. "Yeah," I agreed. "A good one." Life wasn't perfect. Some nights I still had trouble sleeping. Some mornings the cold hit harder than I expected. But Max was always there, warm and patient, waiting. He never judged, never asked questions, just gave. And every time I thought I couldn't keep going, I looked into his eyes and remembered where we'd both started. We were healing. Together. Max got his first proper bath in early February. The water heater in Carl's house was reliable enough for a warm rinse, and I had a few dollars to spare for a bottle of gentle dog shampoo. He didn't like it, not one bit. But he tolerated it with a kind of quiet resignation that almost made me laugh. I kept talking to him through the whole process. Soft, steady, nonsense words, mostly. And he stood still, his tail tucked, but his eyes trusting. When it was over, I wrapped him in a towel like a baby and carried him to the space heater to dry off. He looked offended at first, then resigned, and finally, grateful. He sighed once, closed his eyes, and let me rub his ears. That was a first. Carl poked his head into the room halfway through and raised an eyebrow. "You spoil that dog more than some folks spoil their kids." "Yeah," I said, smiling down at the wet fur ball in my arms. "He's earned it." By the time March rolled around, Max had a new schedule of his own. He woke up before me most mornings, trotted to the door to nudge it with his nose, and waited until I stirred. After our morning walk, he'd curl up under the little table while I wrote applications or checked job boards. He knew which days I worked longer hours and greeted me like clockwork when I returned. It was around then I started attending the veteran support group Carl recommended. I hadn't planned to say anything, just sit in the back and listen. But Max came with me, and on the second meeting, he parked himself next to a younger guy named Trevor, who hadn't said a word all session. Trevor reached down and scratched Max behind the ears without even thinking. That broke the silence. "He always like this?" Trevor asked. "Only if he trusts you," I said. Trevor smiled, just barely. "Guess he's got good judgment." After that, the three of us always sat together. Spring came in slow stretches, one warm day followed by 3 cold ones, then 2 drizzles and a sudden bloom of wild flowers near the fence line. Max chased his first butterfly that April. He didn't catch it, but the way he bounded after it, ears flapping, made Carl laugh so hard he had to sit down on the porch. "You sure he was ever scared of his own shadow?" he asked, wiping tears from his eyes. "I'd bet on it," I said. "But you know what they say. Time and love fix most things." Around that time, I got offered a longer-term job with the landscaping crew. Regular hours, a small bump in pay. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. I took it. To celebrate, Carl made pot roast and invited me to eat in the kitchen instead of the porch. We all sat around the table. Carl, Duke snoring on the mat by the fridge, Max curled under my chair, and the radio playing oldies so softly it felt like memory. I didn't say much that night, but I didn't need to. It felt good, solid, like maybe roots had started growing where I'd never expected to plant anything again. The following week, Max got sick. Not serious, just a stomach bug, but it hit fast. One morning he wouldn't eat. By evening he was curled up under my bed and wouldn't come out. I panicked. I'm not ashamed to admit that. All the progress, the steps forward, we'd come too far. I called the shelter's emergency line, and Marlene answered even though it was after hours. "Sounds like a bug," she said gently. "But bring him in just in case. I'll meet you." I borrowed Carl's truck, wrapped Max in his fleece blanket, and drove through the quiet streets like it was a rescue mission. Max didn't whine, just looked up at me now and then like he knew I was trying. At the shelter, Marlene took one look and nodded. "He's in good hands. Let's get him checked." An hour later, the vet confirmed it. Just a bug. Some fluids, a bland diet, rest. I exhaled so hard my shoulders dropped 3 inches. Back home, Max recovered quickly. By the 3rd day, he was begging for peanut butter again. By the 4th, he barked at the vacuum like he hadn't missed a step. Watching him bounce back reminded me how strong he really was. May brought sunshine and more changes. Trevor, from the support group, asked if I'd come help him build a raised garden bed. Said he had the supplies, but needed an extra pair of hands. Max and I spent the whole Saturday out there, hauling wood, measuring corners, dodging a particularly aggressive robin that seemed to think we were invading its turf. That day, Trevor told me he'd been sleeping in his car until recently. "VA finally got me a spot," he said. "It's not much, but it's a roof." I nodded. Sometimes that's all it takes to start feeling human again. He looked at Max, who was dozing in a patch of sun. You think he knows what he did for you? I think he knows we saved each other. That night, I sat on the porch with Carl. The air smelled like cut grass and old wood. He asked me if I was thinking about moving on soon, getting my own place. I hesitated. I don't want to overstay, I said. You've done more than enough. Carl waved a hand. You're not overstaying. Just figured maybe you and Max need your own place. Space to stretch. A new chapter. It was the first time I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And maybe he was right. It was time to think bigger. The next week, Ellen from the library told me about an apartment complex offering low-income housing to veterans. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and close to work. I filled out the forms, got an interview. Max came with me, and the manager asked if he was trained. He trained me, I said. Hope that counts. We were approved by June. Moving day came fast. Carl helped me load the truck. Marlene stopped by to say goodbye. She brought Max a new toy, a rope shaped like a bone. We're all proud of you, she said. Both of you. The apartment was small, but it was ours. A real lease, a set of keys, a window with sun. Max explored every corner, then flopped down in the middle of the floor like he already owned the place. That night, I sat on the bare mattress with Max tucked under my arm and listened to the hum of the fridge. I thought about every step that led us here. And I knew. We weren't done yet. Not even close. Max settled into the new apartment like he'd been waiting for it his whole life. The first thing he did was claim the corner by the window, his little perch where he could watch the world go by. Every morning, as the sun filtered in through the cheap but clean curtains, he'd stretch, yawn like a lion, and hop onto the cushion I'd placed just for him. He'd sit there for hours, tail flicking now and then, ears alert, eyes scanning. He wasn't guarding anymore. He was just part of the world. I was still figuring out what that meant for me. There was a quiet to the apartment I hadn't known I needed. No footsteps overhead, no distant sirens, just the hum of the fridge, the occasional bark from another dog somewhere on the street, and the soft click of Max's nails on the laminate floor. I started sleeping better. Not perfect, not always through the night, but better. A week after we moved in, I took Max for a walk through the nearby park. It was bigger than the one near Carl's, with a duck pond and a trail that wound through a patch of tall pines. Max sniffed every inch like it was brand new territory. At one point, a squirrel ran right past him, and he gave it a half-hearted chase, then stopped and looked back at me, as if to say, I could have had him, just didn't feel like it. We ran into a woman walking an older lab named Charlie. She was kind, probably in her 60s, wearing a sun hat and sunglasses. She and I ended up walking the same path for a while, talking about nothing serious. Weather, dogs, the way the ducks always seemed to act like they owned the place. You two just move here? She asked. Yeah, I said. Trying out this thing called stability. She smiled. Well, your dog seems to like it. Yeah, I said again, softer this time. He's the reason I'm here. Later that afternoon, I caught Max curled up under my desk, his rope toy tucked between his paws. I reached down and scratched behind his ears, and he leaned into it, eyes half closed. It was still amazing to me how much had changed. This was the same dog who once wouldn't look anyone in the eye. That week, I started volunteering. Nothing big, just helping set up chairs at the community center for events and sweeping the front steps. They had a little board where people could post odd jobs or requests for help. One flyer caught my eye. Veteran neighbor needs help organizing garage. Will pay in cash and homemade cookies. I called the number. A man named Doug answered, and 2 days later, Max and I were in his garage, sorting through a lifetime's worth of screws, wood scraps, fishing gear, and memories. Doug had a limp, but his hands were strong. He told stories while we worked, about fishing trips with his brother, about the time he built a canoe by hand, about his wife's obsession with labeling things. By the end of the afternoon, his garage looked like a hardware store, and Max had been gifted 2 dog biscuits and a pat on the head. "You ever think of doing this full-time?" Doug asked. "Organizing garages?" "No, helping people. You've got a good way about you. Gentle." I didn't know what to say, so I said thank you. A few days later, I got another call from a woman named June, who needed help planting flowers in her yard. Then from a young couple expecting their first child, who wanted someone to assemble a crib. Word was spreading. I didn't charge much, just enough to keep groceries in the fridge and gas in the truck. Max came with me everywhere. Everyone loved him. He'd sit nearby, calmly watching as I hammered or swept or dug. A few kids asked if they could take selfies with him. One woman baked him a carrot cake just for being so polite. The apartment started to feel more like home. I framed the Polaroid from the shelter, the one of Max and me on the bench, and put it above the light switch. I bought a used couch from a second-hand shop. It was faded blue with a tear in one cushion, but Max claimed it the moment we got it inside. Nights were quiet. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I just sat and watched Max breathe. One evening, there was a knock at the door. It was Carl. "Thought I'd check in," he said, holding a bag of groceries. "And I brought bacon. Figured Max wouldn't mind." He stayed for dinner, and we talked until the sun went down. He told me Duke was getting older, slower, but still wagging. "You done good," he said before he left. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The next morning, Max didn't want to get up. He wasn't sick, just tired. I let him sleep in, and for the first time in a while, I went for a walk by myself. It felt strange. The streets were quieter without the sound of his paws beside me. I kept glancing down, expecting him there. I cut the walk short. When I got back, he lifted his head and wagged his tail once. I sat down beside him on the couch and rubbed his side. "We're a team, remember? You rest, I wait." He licked my hand and went back to sleep. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. Real mail, not junk or flyers. It was from the shelter. They were starting a new program, pairing veterans with dogs that needed extra care. They asked if I'd consider being a mentor to someone just starting the process. I read the letter 3 times before setting it down. Max jumped onto the couch beside me and looked up. "You think we're ready to help someone else?" He barked. Just once. And that was all I needed. The first veteran I mentored was a guy named Lenny, mid-30s, wiry frame, and a stare that hovered somewhere between suspicion and exhaustion. When we met, he didn't talk much, just nodded when spoken to, answered questions with the fewest words possible. I recognized the look right away. I'd seen it in mirrors. He was paired with a brindle mutt named Jasper. Jasper had a crooked tail and one ear that refused to stand up straight. According to the shelter staff, he'd been rescued from a backyard where he'd been chained for months. No abuse, no broken bones, but plenty of neglect. The kind that doesn't show up in X-rays, but lingers in the soul. The first meeting was quiet. I brought Max, who, true to form, kept things calm just by existing. We sat in the grassy lot behind the shelter. Lenny on one bench, me on the other. Jasper paced, sniffing nervously. Max laid down with his back to us like he wasn't paying attention. I watched as Jasper slowly drifted toward him, inch by inch. When he got close enough, Max lifted his head and gave a soft woof just once. Jasper froze, ears twitching, then dropped to the grass beside him. Lenny watched it all, eyes narrowing. "They know," I said quietly. "Dogs. They recognize pain in each other." He didn't reply, but he didn't leave either. For the next few weeks, we met twice a week. Short walks, longer silences. Jasper learned to follow Max's lead. Lenny, little by little, opened up. He told me about sleeping in his truck outside a gas station. About the time he tried to go back to his old job and lasted 2 hours before walking off the site. About the woman who used to write him letters overseas but stopped replying one day without a word. "Felt like the last thread snapped," he said. "After that, I just drifted." I nodded. I know that drift. Max would sit beside me, tail still, just listening. Jasper stayed close to Lenny, never more than a few feet away. Eventually, the shelter arranged for Lenny to foster Jasper. He moved into a shared housing complex for veterans, and though it wasn't ideal, it was stable. I helped him set up a crate and donated one of Max's spare beds. Jasper claimed it like it was always his. One afternoon, Lenny and I stood in the parking lot after a walk. The dogs were sniffing the grass, half interested in a squirrel that had already bolted. "You ever feel like you were saved by accident?" Lenny asked. I thought about it. Maybe not accident. Maybe just the right mess, finding the right mess. He laughed. Really laughed. It was the first time I'd heard it. By the end of the month, Jasper was sleeping at Lenny's feet, tail thumping when he talked. Lenny had started bringing him to group meetings. I caught him smiling once when Jasper chased a moth under a table. The mentorship program had more requests. I met a few others, some who clicked with their dogs instantly, others who took longer. Max became a kind of unofficial therapy dog, steady and warm. The shelter even printed a small flyer with our photo, calling us Hope in Motion. I didn't love the name, but Max got a free chew toy out of it, so I couldn't complain. One morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was from my neighbor 2 doors down, a single mom named Claire who worked nights at the hospital. Her son Ethan had seen Max through the window and wanted to meet him. "He's 8, the note read, and a little shy. Max seems gentle. If it's too much, no worries." I walked down and knocked. Ethan opened the door, eyes wide. I crouched so I wouldn't tower over him. "You must be Ethan. Heard you wanted to meet my partner in crime." He nodded and looked past me. Max stood calmly, ears perked. "Can I pet him? Ask him first." Ethan held out his hand. Max sniffed it, then gave it a lick. Ethan giggled and sat down on the floor. Max sat too. They stared at each other for a full minute, like ancient souls greeting across time. From then on, Ethan became part of Max's circle. He'd wave from the window when we went on walks. Sometimes he'd leave drawings under our door. Max as a superhero, Max as a pirate, Max flying a spaceship. I taped everyone to the fridge. The apartment complex began to feel like a real neighborhood. People knew our names. Kids asked to walk Max. Neighbors offered leftovers. A few even asked for help fixing things. I didn't always say yes, but I liked being asked. One evening, I got a call from the community center. They were organizing a small event, Veterans and Rescues, a kind of meet and greet to raise awareness for the mentorship program. They wanted Max and me to attend. I hesitated. Public speaking wasn't my thing, but I agreed. On the day of the event, the The room was decorated with red, white, and blue streamers, fold-out chairs, coffee urns, a table full of cookies. Photos of dogs lined the walls, each one paired with a brief story. Ours was front and center. I sat beside Max, who wore a little bandana someone had tied around his neck. He looked mildly annoyed, but accepted it. People came by. Some asked questions. Others just nodded. One man teared up when he read Max's bio. I gave a short talk, just a few words. This dog saved my life. Not in a dramatic way. No explosions, no heroics, just by showing up every day, without fail, and by letting me do the same for him. That was it. That's all I had. But it felt like enough. Max barked once. The crowd laughed. Afterward, a young couple approached. They'd recently lost their dog and were thinking about fostering. They asked about the program. I told them everything I could. "Do you ever worry," the woman asked, "that they'll leave again?" "Every day," I said. "But they're here now. That's what matters." As the evening wound down, I looked at Max curled up at my feet, bandana askew, eyes drooping. We'd come far, and I knew there was still more to come. But for now, we rested, together. Max had always been quiet, but the way he began to carry himself over the next few weeks felt different. Not timid, not cautious, just steady. Wherever we went, whether it was the hardware store, the park, or the front office of the apartment complex, people stopped and asked about him. More than once, someone asked if he was a therapy dog. I usually smiled and said, something like that. By now, we had a rhythm that even time respected. Mornings were slow, just the way we liked them. Max would stretch in that long, lazy way that only dogs can do, then tap his paws softly against the bedroom floor, waiting for me to get moving. I made coffee. He waited patiently by the door. Sometimes I caught him watching me with a look that seemed older than time. Midway through July, the heat rolled in heavy, the kind that made the sidewalks shimmer. We started walking early, before the sun baked the streets. There was a shady loop behind the apartment complex where the trees met in a canopy, and Max had claimed a certain patch of grass as his own. That was our morning spot. No words needed, just a man and his dog, watching squirrels scurry and breeze sway branches. It was on one of those early walks that we met Marcus. Tall, thin, maybe 20. Hoodie, even in the heat. He was sitting on the ground by the dumpster, arms wrapped around his knees, eyes somewhere far away. Max saw him first, and stopped. Wouldn't budge. "Come on, bud," I said, giving the leash a gentle tug. But Max stood his ground. Then Marcus looked up. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, just stared at Max like he wasn't sure if he was real. I knelt beside Max. "He's friendly." Marcus didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. "Mind if we sit?" Still nothing. But he didn't say no. So we sat. 5 minutes passed. Maybe 10. The silence wasn't awkward, just thick with something unspoken. Max eventually laid down, head on his paws, eyes still on Marcus. Finally, Marcus muttered, "He's calm." "Yeah, he's good at that." "What's his name?" "Max." He nodded slowly. "You live here? Just down the hall." That was it. Our first exchange. Short, but real. Over the next few mornings, Marcus was there again. Always in the same spot. Always quiet. Max always insisted we stop. I never pushed conversation, but I offered it like a coat, there if he needed it. One day, I brought an extra coffee, left it near him. The next day, he nodded in thanks. A week later, he asked if Max liked peanut butter. "Like isn't a strong enough word." He smiled. "I got those little crackers, the sandwich kind." He'd trade me for one. Marcus laughed. Just a breath of it. But it was the kind of laugh that meant something was starting to thaw. Eventually, he started walking with us. Not every day, but sometimes. Just a few blocks. Max would trot between us like a bridge, pausing now and then to glance back and make sure we were both still there. One morning, Marcus asked, "You work?" "Odd jobs, and I help run a dog program for veterans." He looked surprised. "Like training?" "More like healing, pairing people with dogs who need the same kind of quiet." He didn't respond. But the next day, he asked if he could come by and meet some of the other dogs. We set it up for Saturday. The shelter staff were more than happy to make space. Marlene even baked cookies. Max, as usual, played ambassador, leading Marcus through the space like he owned the place. He introduced him to every dog. Jasper barked once in greeting. Another pup named Daisy tried to climb in Marcus's lap. He didn't flinch. That night, Marcus sat on my porch steps and said, "I used to have a dog, before foster care." "What was her name?" "Blue. She was gray, but I called her Blue." "You miss her?" "Every day." We didn't speak again after that, just let the night carry it. The shelter found a pup that reminded Marcus of Blue. Not in looks, but in feel. A quiet dog named Ellie. Pale coat, gentle eyes. She'd been found wandering near a highway. Marcus sat with her for an hour the first time. No words, just stillness. When he stood up, she followed. The staff smiled. I knew what that meant. He started volunteering, feeding, cleaning, walking, slowly becoming part of something again. Meanwhile, Max and I kept on. We joined a weekend reading program at the library, where kids read aloud to dogs. It was a hit. Max especially liked a little boy named Robbie, who gave him treats between every page. One morning, I found a flyer in the mailroom. Local paper seeks feature stories about community helpers. I almost threw it away. Then I didn't. I emailed a few lines about the mentorship program, about Max. A week later, a reporter named Dinah called. "Would you be willing to meet?" she asked. "We'd love to tell your story. Only if Max got the headline," I told her. We met at the park. Dana brought a photographer. Max posed like a pro. The article came out 3 days later. Title: A Dog Named Max and the Veteran Who Followed Him Home. The article spread. I got emails, calls. A teacher from a neighboring town asked if I'd speak at her school. A shelter in another state asked how to start a similar program. I wasn't ready for any of it, but I tried. Max stayed the same. Calm, steady, constant. And every night, as I turned off the lights, he hopped onto his spot by the window, curled up, and watched the stars come out. The first time I stood in front of a classroom to talk about Max, my hands were shaking so bad I thought I'd drop the leash. The kids, 4th and 5th graders from Mrs. Lindholm's class, sat in rows on a worn-out carpet, legs crisscrossed, eyes wide. Some fidgeted. One kept tugging on a loose shoelace. But they were all watching us. Max didn't flinch. He trotted in like he was walking into his own kitchen, calm and confident, then settled near my feet and gave a single bark, like a punctuation mark. "Hi," I started. My voice cracked. "This is Max. I'm the guy he adopted." That got a few laughs. I told them the story the way I remembered it. How he used to sit facing the wall in the shelter. How he wouldn't look at anyone. How I wasn't really there to find a dog, just someplace warm to sit. How something about him made me stay. One kid raised his hand. "Were you scared he wouldn't like you?" "Terrified," I said. "But sometimes the quiet ones are just waiting for someone to listen." Another kid asked if Max had a favorite toy. I pointed to the half-chewed rope in my bag. Max perked up at the word toy and wagged his tail. Before we left, the kids handed me a stack of drawings, Max in every shape and color imaginable. One of them had drawn wings on him. Above the picture, she'd written, "Every hero has a tail." That one went straight on the fridge. We visited 3 more classrooms that month. The shelter started getting more calls, not just about adoption, but about volunteering. Teachers, parents, retirees, people who wanted to help, people who had something to give, even if they didn't know it yet. Max became a kind of mascot. At the shelter, he had his own bin of treats. At the park, strangers called out his name. Someone even made him a custom tag that read Captain Max. He wore it with the quiet dignity of someone who knew he'd earned every bit of praise. Meanwhile, Marcus was thriving. Ellie stuck to him like glue. He started showing up to every mentorship meeting, always early, sometimes bringing coffee. He helped train a newer volunteer, a teen named Cody, who'd dropped out of high school and was looking for something to do besides stay out of trouble. Cody and Marcus hit it off. I watched them clean kennels and walk the nervous dogs, neither of them saying much, but both finding their own rhythm. Ellie, true to her name, became the gentle tether holding them both steady. Carl came to visit us at the apartment one weekend. He brought Duke, who was moving slower these days but still had that familiar sparkle in his eyes. Max greeted him like an old friend. They didn't bark, just a quiet sniff and a shared spot in the sun. We grilled hot dogs on a little tabletop grill I'd found at a yard sale. Carl told me about a new veteran who'd moved into his building. "Rough around the edges," he said, "but good bones." "You ever think of mentoring?" I asked. Carl scoffed. "I mentor by keeping quiet and minding my business." I smiled. That's a type of wisdom. He looked at Max. "You still carrying this guy?" Max looked up at him, tail wagging once. "Guess it goes both ways," Carl muttered. That night I found an envelope taped to my door. No name, just handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a note. "Thank you for showing what patience looks like. The world needs more of it." And a gift card to the local pet store. Max got a new bed out of it. The old one was still fine, but something about seeing him step onto that fresh cushion, turn in a circle and sigh contentedly, made my chest tighten. We weren't used to things being easy, but we were learning. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I saw Ethan sitting on a bench, arms crossed, head down. He didn't see me at first. Max did. He trotted right up and nudged Ethan's leg. Ethan looked up, eyes watery. "Hey, buddy," I said, sitting beside him. He didn't speak right away. Finally, he muttered, "They made fun of my shoes." I glanced down. They were worn, laces frayed, too small. "Kids can be cruel," I said, "especially when they're scared of looking different themselves." He wiped his face. "Max doesn't care." "Nope, Max thinks you're awesome." Ethan managed a smile. "He's a good friend. He's the best kind." We sat a while longer. Then I stood up and said, "Come on, let's walk." He nodded and followed. The next day, I found a pair of gently used sneakers in Max's donation box at the shelter. Just Ethan's size. I left them on his porch. Said nothing. A few days later, he came running out as we passed, wearing the sneakers and grinning wide. Max barked in approval. We kept showing up. Every week, new faces at the shelter, new stories. Some heavy, some hopeful, a few heartbreaking. But always there was Max, steady as ever. One afternoon, Marlene asked if I'd consider leading a workshop for new volunteers. Just a few hours, she said. Help them understand the heart of it. I agreed. The first session was small. 6 people. I talked about trust, about patience, about how sometimes the dogs won't come to you, and that's okay. Sometimes the healing starts just by being there, by not walking away. I shared Max's story again. No matter how many times I told it, it never got old. One woman stayed behind afterward. She was in her 70s, quiet eyes and a firm handshake. I lost my husband last year, she said, and I haven't known what to do with my days. I nodded. She smiled, just a little. I think I'd like to sit with the quiet ones. I told her that would be perfect. That night, Max curled up beside me on the couch. I turned off the lamp, the hum of the city just faint through the windows. And as I drifted off, I whispered, "Thanks for choosing me." He didn't move, but I knew he heard me. The first time I stood in front of a classroom to talk about Max, my hands were shaking so bad I thought I'd drop the leash. The kids, 4th and 5th graders from Mrs. Lindholm's class, sat in rows on a worn-out carpet, legs crisscrossed, eyes wide. Some fidgeted. One kept tugging on a loose shoelace, but they were all watching us. Max didn't flinch. He trotted in like he was walking into his own kitchen, calm and confident, then settled near my feet and gave a single bark, like a punctuation mark. "Hi," I started. My voice cracked. "This is Max. I'm the guy he adopted." That got a few laughs. I told them the story the way I remembered it, how he used to sit facing the wall in the shelter, how he wouldn't look at anyone, how I wasn't really there to find a dog, just someplace warm to sit, how something about him made me stay. One kid raised his hand. "Were you scared he wouldn't like you?" "Terrified," I said. "But sometimes the quiet ones are just waiting for someone to listen." Another kid asked if Max had a favorite toy. I pointed to the half-chewed rope in my bag. Max perked up at the word toy and wagged his tail. Before we left, the kids handed me a stack of drawings, Max in every shape and color imaginable. One of them had drawn wings on him. Above the picture, she'd written, "Every hero has a tail." That one went straight on the fridge. We visited 3 more classrooms that month. The shelter started getting more calls, not just about adoption, but about volunteering. Teachers, parents, retirees, people who wanted to help, people who had something to give, even if they didn't know it yet. Max became a kind of mascot. At the shelter, he had his own bin of treats. At the park, strangers called out his name. Someone even made him a custom tag that read, "Captain Max." He wore it with the quiet dignity of someone who knew he'd earned every bit of praise. Meanwhile, Marcus was thriving. Ellie stuck to him like glue. He started showing up to every mentorship meeting. Always early, sometimes bringing coffee. He helped train a newer volunteer, a teen named Cody, who'd dropped out of high school and was looking for something to do besides stay out of trouble. Cody and Marcus hit it off. I watched them clean kennels and walk the nervous dogs, neither of them saying much, but both finding their own rhythm. Ellie, true to her name, became the gentle tether holding them both steady. Carl came to visit us at the apartment one weekend. He brought Duke, who was moving slower these days, but still had that familiar sparkle in his eyes. Max greeted him like an old friend. They didn't bark, just a quiet sniff and a shared spot in the sun. We grilled hot dogs on a little tabletop grill I'd found at a yard sale. Carl told me about a new veteran who'd moved into his building. "Rough around the edges," he said, "but good bones." "You ever think of mentoring?" I asked. Carl scoffed. "I mentor by keeping quiet and minding my business." I smiled. "That's a type of wisdom." He looked at Max. "You still carrying this guy?" Max looked up at him, tail wagging once. "Guess it goes both ways," Carl muttered. That night, I found an envelope taped to my door. No name, just handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a note. "Thank you for showing what patience looks like. The world needs more of it." And a gift card to the local pet store. Max got a new bed out of it. The old one was still fine, but something about seeing him step onto that fresh cushion, turn in a circle and sigh contentedly, made my chest tighten. We weren't used to things being easy, but we were learning. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I saw Ethan sitting on a bench, arms crossed, head down. He didn't see me at first. Max did. He trotted right up and nudged Ethan's leg. Ethan looked up, eyes watery. "Hey, buddy," I said, sitting beside him. He didn't speak right away. Finally, he muttered, "They made fun of my shoes." I glanced down. They were worn, laces frayed, too small. "Kids can be cruel," I said, "especially when they're scared of looking different themselves." He wiped his face. "Max doesn't care." "Nope, Max thinks you're awesome." Ethan managed a smile. "He's a good friend. He's the best kind." We sat a while longer. Then I stood up and said, "Come on, let's walk." He nodded and followed. The next day, I found a pair of gently used sneakers in Max's donation box at the shelter. Just Ethan's size. I left them on his porch. Said nothing. A few days later, he came running out as we passed, wearing the sneakers and grinning wide. Max barked in approval. We kept showing up, every week. New faces at the shelter, new stories, some heavy, some hopeful, a few heartbreaking. But always there was Max, steady as ever. One afternoon, Marlene asked if I'd consider leading a workshop for new volunteers. "Just a few hours," she said. "Help them understand the heart of it." I agreed. The first session was small, 6 people. I talked about trust, about patience, about how sometimes the dogs won't come to you, and that's okay. Sometimes the healing starts just by being there, by not walking away. I shared Max's story again. No matter how many times I told it, it never got old. One woman stayed behind afterward. She was in her 70s. Quiet eyes and a firm handshake. "I lost my husband last year," she said, "and I haven't known what to do with my days." I nodded. She smiled, just a little. "I think I'd like to sit with the quiet ones." I told her that would be perfect. That night, Max curled up beside me on the couch. I turned off the lamp, the hum of the city just faint through the windows. And as I drifted off, I whispered, "Thanks for choosing me." He didn't move, but I knew he heard me. Max had developed a habit of checking on me every night before bed. He'd do his rounds, wander to the door, sniff around the windows, then circle back to wherever I was. If I was at the table, he'd nudge my knee. If I was brushing my teeth, he'd wait by the bathroom door. Only when he saw I was finally settling into bed would he curl up on his cushion by the window. like a watchman clocking out at the end of his shift. It was a quiet comfort, one I'd come to depend on. August brought thick heat and heavy air, the kind that made the pavement steam after short summer rains. Max and I adjusted our schedule, walking early and late, avoiding the worst of the sun. On the hottest afternoons, he'd sprawl across the linoleum in the kitchen, legs splayed, tongue out, looking up at me like, "You sure about this whole summer thing?" We still stopped by the shelter a few times a week. Marlene had taken to calling Max the ambassador. He'd trot in, tail up, and make his way from pen to pen, greeting the newer dogs with quiet presence. Some barked, some hid. Some pressed their noses through the bars, and Max would meet them where they were. Never rushed, never loud. One day, a terrier mix named Ginger got her tail stepped on by accident during a group walk. She yelped and tried to bolt, but Max stood between her and the staff until she calmed. Not growling, not tense, just there. A soft wall between panic and safety. The staff called it instinct, I called it growth. That week I got a call from Ellen at the library. "We're starting a dog reading program at the juvenile center," she said, "just once a week. Would you and Max be willing?" I said yes before she finished the sentence. The center was quiet when we arrived. A tall fence surrounded the building, and the inside smelled like pine cleaner and old paper. The boys, most of them between 12 and 16, sat stiffly in plastic chairs, unsure whether to care or pretend they didn't. Max walked in like he owned the place. He didn't bark, just walked from kid to kid, letting them decide. A few reached out. One boy flinched, then slowly offered a hand. Max sniffed it and gave a gentle lick. The boy didn't smile, but his shoulders dropped. They read Dr. Seuss, mostly, short, rhyming stories. At first, the boys stumbled over words, embarrassed, but Max didn't judge. He laid down in the middle of the circle and let them find their own rhythm. One of the guards approached me after our third visit. "Had a kid refuse to speak for a month," he said. "Read 2 full pages to your dog today." Max wagged his tail, like he already knew. Back at home, things were steady. Ethan had started walking Max with me on Saturdays. He brought his own leash, borrowed from a neighbor, and practiced holding it like a pro. Max tolerated it, even when Ethan forgot the pace and tugged too fast. Claire, Ethan's mom, invited us in for lemonade one afternoon. She worked long shifts and said having someone like Max in Ethan's life had been a gift. "He talks about him like a best friend," she said. "Draws him into every story. He even pretends to be Max when he's playing with his toys." Max, true to form, just rested by the fan and blinked slowly. By the middle of the month, the mentorship program had grown. We had 6 active volunteers, all veterans, and 10 dogs placed with individuals or families. Jasper and Lenny were still regulars. Ellie and Marcus had become inseparable. Even Cody had taken in a shy puppy named Tansy. He said she reminded him of his little sister, back before everything got messy. One evening I got a call from Carl. Duke had passed away. "He went easy," Carl said. "Didn't even cry. Just closed his eyes." I sat down slowly. "Want us to come by?" I asked. "Nah, not tonight, but maybe tomorrow." We did. Max walked through Carl's place like he was looking for Duke. He sniffed the old rug, the porch steps, the corner by the couch where Duke always napped. Carl watched him and said, "Feels like the house shrank." I nodded. We sat on the porch for hours, sipping weak coffee. Max laid down at our feet. No one spoke much, but we didn't need to. Before we left, Carl handed me a collar. Duke's. "Don't hang it up like a trophy," he said. "Give it to a dog that needs it." I promised I would. That collar found its place a week later, around the neck of a big shepherd named Knox. Knox had been through a house fire, lost his family, and refused to eat for days. But something about Duke's collar seemed to change him. He started following commands, walking without hesitation. The shelter staff said it was like a torch had been passed. I sent Carl a photo. He didn't reply right away, but 2 days later, a card showed up at my door. "Not bad," it read. "Duke would approve." Max and I had a lot of evenings like that. Quiet, reflective, warm with memory. One night, while brushing him before bed, I found an old scar under his fur. Not a bad one, faded, but it caught me off guard. I must have missed it before. Or maybe it just took this long to see it, because Max finally felt safe enough to relax that deeply. I ran my fingers over it gently. "We all carry something, huh?" I whispered. He looked up at me, then laid his head on my knee. We stayed like that until the room dimmed. Later that week, Dana from the paper called again. "We're doing a follow-up," she said. "People want to know how you and Max are doing." "We're good," I told her. "Busy. Too busy for one more story?" I looked at Max, who was chasing a dream in his sleep, paws twitching. "Never too busy for that." The second article ran under the headline, "From Abandoned to Beloved, Max and the Man Who Walked Beside Him." More calls followed, one from a rescue group in Oregon, another from a school board in Iowa. Even a small cable news station wanted to do a segment. It was overwhelming. But every time I felt myself spinning, Max would nudge me, ground me, remind me what mattered. Not the cameras, not the headlines, just this life, this path, one quiet step at a time. The sun rose slow that morning, a soft orange haze stretching across the tops of the buildings like someone had painted the sky in quiet. Max was already by the window, tail tapping gently against the floor, his usual early morning check-in. I sat up in bed and let the silence sit for a moment. It felt heavier than usual, not in a bad way, just full, like something was shifting. Our calendar was packed for the week. Another school visit, a shelter orientation, and a small gathering for the mentorship volunteers down by the river park. The program had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We had over 20 mentors now, each one paired with a rescue dog, each with a story that had begun in silence and bloomed into something steadier. Max had touched every one of them, either directly or through the stories passed around, like campfire warmth. We stopped by the shelter first. Marlene was there, as usual, standing near the front desk with a clipboard and a grin that hadn't faded since spring. She handed me a folder filled with volunteer notes and intake forms. Max, unbothered, trotted over to the far corner where a new pup had just arrived the night before. A scared-looking spaniel with wide eyes and a coat matted from weeks on the street. Max didn't rush her. He just laid down beside the crate, tail sweeping slowly across the tile. The spaniel watched him. Didn't growl, didn't flinch, just watched. When Max finally stood and walked back toward me, the little dog let out one small bark, almost like she was saying, "Okay, maybe." "You see that?" Marlene asked, scribbling a note. "He's a miracle worker." "He just shows up," I said. "That's the miracle." Our next stop was the river park. The volunteers had set up a few tables beneath the trees, with sandwiches and lemonade and bowls of water for the dogs. Marcus was already there with Ellie, tossing a stick lazily into the shallows. Cody showed up with Tansy, who immediately made it her mission to greet every single person with a wet nose and muddy paws. Even Lenny, who usually kept to the sidelines, brought Jasper and lingered near the snacks. I stood back and watched for a while. The dogs chasing butterflies, the people laughing over shared stories, the kids weaving between picnic blankets. And in the middle of it all, Max, calm, unshaken, watching it unfold like he was proud. A local band set up later that afternoon, soft acoustic stuff that blended into the breeze. People danced, slowly, without self-consciousness. Max laid by my feet, panting lightly, his eyes half closed in that peaceful way he'd always had when surrounded by good noise. A woman approached as the sun began to dip. Mid-40s, sandy blonde hair pulled into a loose braid, a camera around her neck. She knelt down and offered Max her hand. "I've been following your story," she said, looking up at me. "I write for a blog, Rescued Hearts. Would you mind if I took a photo?" "Long as he doesn't have to pose," I said. She smiled and snapped a few shots. Max with his head tilted toward the music, Max resting against my boot, Max watching the spaniel from earlier, who had somehow snuck into the event and now sat just a few feet away. "You ever think of writing a book?" she asked. "Your story could help so many people." I thought about it. "Maybe someday," I said. "But right now I'd rather just keep walking." Later that night, after we'd packed up the tables and waved goodbye to the last car pulling out of the gravel lot, Max and I stayed behind. The stars were just starting to peek through. I walked down to the edge of the river and sat on the old wooden bench we used to visit when things were still uncertain. Max climbed up beside me, which he rarely did anymore. He pressed against my side and let out a soft breath, his head on my knee. "I was lost when I found you," I said quietly. "Didn't think anyone would see me again. But you did." He didn't move, just breathed. "You gave me a reason to show up. A reason to stay. I thought I was helping you. Turns out you were saving me the whole time." The river moved slow beneath the moonlight, the trees rustling above like whispers. When we got home, Max made his rounds, checked the door, the window, the mat near the fridge where his toys were tucked. Then he curled up on his bed, tail twitching once, and closed his eyes. I turned off the lights and stood for a moment, watching him sleep. No medals, no headlines, just a quiet space filled with something real. We had found our peace, together.